Let me give you a little quick tour of my present studio. This is actually a 10 by 14 room, and as you can see, I've built up quite a bit so that to save floor space. I actually have an open floor space of about, I would say 10 by 8, which is nice. Maybe a little bigger, I don't know, but it's plenty of room for setting up, guitars or whatever you have to do, run a band in here, bass, guitar, singer. So I have here, we'll start with the drum kit. This is the centerpiece of my whole studio. This is they call that the turquoise badge. It's from the 70s, and it's an oversized kick drum, 24-inch. It's the same one that John Bonham used through most of his career. I also got a pearl rack to kind of save on legroom here, so removed a lot of the tripod stands, which gave it so much more room, and it's no tripping hazards, and it was a good move. Here we got lots of nice cymbals. They're all mainly Zildjian. A couple Chinas. A couple crashes. And a ride. Most of them custom, but there's a couple different varieties under there. Here is where I monitor the drums. I have it on isolated headphones, and you can run here. You see, you can add your own monitoring on there, which is, more snare, more kick, more of the vocals, and where it says Yamaha, that's like the scratch track coming in. This has nothing to do with the recording setup. This is all just the monitoring. I do that with a pair of overheads, and also one for catching the low end down here, which is the kick and the toms. So it sounds very well rounded and good stereo feel, and it's very good for monitoring. Now, as far as recording, I got an Audix on this piccolo snare, and then the main snare I'm using the EV tom mics, which I really like. They can kind of swivel around quite good. They're quite mobile. Here's the tom-toms. This is a couple sonars. And then the floor tom, which is it's not the big kettle 16-inch, it's a 14-inch, which I like. It's not so muddy, but it does give you a nice deep sound. And then there's just a couple of rocket toms here, which can be taken or left, whatever. My hi-hats, actually, I used to use these Zildjian Customs. They were the 14-inch, but I actually went with these Sabian 13-inch. They're much more tight and easier to mix, and the other ones were a little loud and overpowering in the mix. So this was a really good move as far as recording drums for myself. All my stands are Pearl. I really like Pearl, and so that gives you a quick overview of the drums. I do have some extra mic stands so that more targeted miking for the drum kit, or more room mics, whatever the need is at the moment. Okay, the next we'll go up here. We'll take a look at the guitars. I have a few in the shop right now. I have a shop where I fine-tune guitars, set them up, restring them. I usually have for between 10 and 12 good dialed-in guitars. Everything from Strats to Les Pauls, sounding guitars. And then this one is an Ibanez, lower-tuned, made in Japan Ibanez, which sounds really, really good. Down here I got acoustic guitars and basses. Again, everything the heart's desire on the bass sounds, from 5-string to vintage 4-strings to more modern sounding basses. Over here, I'll start with my bass setup. This is a Sans amp, RPI, actually RBI. There's two. One's an RPI, one's an RBI. I have the RBI, which it's quite a good simulation of the old Ampeg SVT series heads, which are so darn expensive and finicky. And then I run this through an old QVC 1500 watt amp, which is bridged into mono, and it comes out pretty darn good sounding. It goes through this pine cab with a 115-inch bass speaker in there. I also have this for bass. I really like this Line 6. Their bass modules in there. They have different ones that they cooked up in their labs, which I think sound pretty good. Some people, the purists, might not like them. But here, if you're a real purist, I have a really good bass amp PV, which goes through a 210. Sometimes I do the 15 and the 210. And that gives you quite a good bass tone. I also sometimes use this this 11 rack, which is another amp simulator. I don't use these often on guitars, but on bass I really like to use them. And that goes through an LA2 preamp, which really compresses it and gives it a real warm, it kind of warms it back up from digital back to an analog distortion sound, which I really like. And I've recorded this bass and people have tried to guess what was going on, and it does sound very analog sounding. So those are my bass recording options. The Line 6, the Sans amp through a power amp, through a microphone, and then a PV210, good bassy bass amp. Here's my guitar amp setup. I've got a modified Mesa Boogie, which sounds very good. It's actually modified. Mesa Boogie is known for their metal tones, but I modified it actually to be a little more lighter. It actually doesn't give me a very good metal tone, believe it or not. The cleans on this and the light classic rock distortions are incredible. It's just the tubes I used. I ran a little bit lighter tubes, and I run it on the vacuum tube rectifier and a spongy setting. And yeah, it's interesting that I chose that route with this. I'm sure with the right tubes and different settings I could get a metal tone, but right now that's my amp of choice as far as a good lead tone. Now this here is a monster. It's the Knucklehead, and that is a metal amp, and it sounds beefy. I've recorded bands, and this is the amp that they, after hearing all my amps, this is the one they usually go for. It's so versatile. And then I got my More Sound, which is a real boutique amp. These things are very pricey, and they are very well built, military grade components, and this sounds amazing too. It can give you all sorts of sounds. Basically here in this you got channel 1, which is clean, on the channel 1 you actually can go from distortion like a Marshall tone or a clean tone. Channel 2 is just the modern balls to the walls tone. Anyways, a lot of tones in there. Those are my main 3 amps as far as getting the best tones. I do have an old, this is actually a signature of Eddie Van Halen 5150. They call this a large block. It's made like somewhere in the early 90s or late 80s. But this thing is also just crazy amount of gain, and I hardly use that. I'm saving it more as a investment, hoping it will go in value since it was signed by Eddie Van Halen. Rest in peace. You can use this for guitar tones too, but not so true to the tone. It's a little more digital sounding. Sometimes I just use it for scratch tracks or whatever. I do run right now, this is my setup for effects. I've got an old Ibanez stereo chorus, which is really amazing sounding. The chorus modulates on each channel, right and left, so it's very stereo-y. Here are my reverbs and delays, and then this is a TC Electronics effects unit, which I just use for the reverb, basically, because it has such an amazing reverb sound to it. And then I run all that effects through a Peavey Classic chorus on the low gain channel, clean. And these are a couple Celestion Vintage 30 speakers, so it's a very good sound that comes through there for the effects. And then down here the tube amp will run through that, and the line out on a hot plate will run the effects. Very good for recording effects on the fly, more natural than using plugins. And then you have your clean tone down here. These are all mic'd, as you can see. This is a chorusing, it's a stereo chorus like the Roland Classic Chorus, where one speaker is running clean and the other one's modulated by a stereo chorus. So actually you can record both of these. You can hear them through the PA system, and then you can also record the true tube amp sound. So with those three mics running up here, mainly for monitoring, you got your classic chorus left and your classic chorus right. This is the basically the Guitar Center's monitoring area. You got your vocals. This is the 11 rack. This is the Fender Champ. These are different speakers. This is the Line 6. And these three are what I just showed you. That's the 410 guitar speakers, and this is the classic chorus left and right. Here are the three drum mics I mentioned earlier. This is the organ, which I'll get into, and this is the computer out, and this is for MP3s for listening to whatever, and then there's the effects. But that's basically where you can monitor that through isolated headphones while the guitar player plays. It has nothing to do with the recording, only monitoring. Okay, so we covered the bass amps, we covered the guitar amps. Here is just some effects that can be also run through different times. This is actually another preamp that I don't have in my setup right now. It's a 610, dual 610. This here is the old Roland digital delay, one of the first delays. It's actually the one that Eddie Van Halen used for his tone, and it's just so much components in there. It's amazing. It's really old school. You actually have to set mathematically your delay for, there's nothing automatic, no tap tempo or nothing. You got to figure out the math and set it, but it is an amazing sounding delay. There's all my overdrive pedals, and this is a talk box that is, if you're really into the old 70s music, a lot of the Peter Frampton, Jeff Beck, the Nazareth, a lot of them use a talk box, so it's very cool, very fun. Now, as far as these guitar amps go in, they can go into a number of different speakers. And I'd have this 410, these are Celestion Greenbacks 410 through Tonewood speakers, which gives it a lot of low end. This is an amazing, it's super cheap wood, plywood, old. And so there's not much resonance from that wood because it's just so dead. But it's got a 4 ohm speaker in there, a Peavey Scorpion, which is an amazing sounding, gritty speaker. So that it can handle a lot of wattage, and you can crank that thing and get a really good tone. I can send some tone samples of these different speakers. But that's a 112 to record out of. This is probably my closest thing to a 412. Up here I've got a old JBL, the old Jimi Hendrix JBL 130, and it's original cone, silver cone, and that is for cleans. 15-inch through a tone wood cabinet. Oh man, low, shimmering, true to the reality sound right there. Vintage. Those speakers are quite pricey. They go for a lot on eBay, and it's hard to find one that hasn't been reconed. Up here, this is a very good recording speaker. It's got a Celestion Greenback 10-inch in there, and then it's got a Celestion 85, which is a cross between the 75 and the Vintage 30, which is kind of a really nice speaker Marshall used for a long time. And so I got a mic on each one of those. Running through an amp, you can choose 2 different tones, and that is some old pine on that, which sounds really nice. Really a real good combination of wood and speaker there for some reason, just magical. I've built some speakers that don't sound so good, and actually that one is just junky wood that came out sounding amazing. It's hit and miss sometimes. So that's different speaker options for guitar amps. Over here, here's another couple this is a PV Scorpion again, the 15-inch Scorpion, which is one of my favorite speakers. They sell a cone kit for it, and they just take a lot of beating. They sound really nice, and they're light. They're aluminum frame. The magnets are pretty heavy, but nice light speaker. I can actually throw that speaker around quite easy. Here is another one of those Celestion 85s in a real tone wood cabinet. This one, again, I hit the mark. It's ported, so it's kind of like, gives you that opened back sound of a combo amp, which is kind of magical. And it's really this speaker is able to breathe quite a bit, so it's not your compressed 412 sound. It's more of a open back. Here we got again, this is a Vintage 30, a Vintage 10 I should say, and it's really good old pine. So this thing just sounds amazing too. These air hole handles give it a sound of a breathy combo speaker. It's got a 110-inch speaker. Some of these are just good for recording. Here is a nice little amp. It's a More Sound, similar amp to his bigger one, but it sounds very good. Very clean, 1 channel, great for cleans, takes pedals amazing. This is just an acoustic guitar amp that is quite nice. This is one John Fisher built. It's a JF amp. This is kind of after the Bogner. The cleans are really tubey, and the distortion is just got so much life to it. It's really a fun amp to use. It's a 10 what are they, those EL84s, so it's about a 20-watt amp, so you can really crank it and get it smoking without being too loud. This one's really one of my go-to amps for cleans. It's a Fender Champ. It's got one tube that drums the power section, so it's about a 10-watt or something. Jimi Hendrix used this for a lot of his recordings. And it's through a nice speaker. And that one is really nice sounding amp. Over here we've got a piano section. And then I'm going to show you out here. This is believe it or not, all those amps that I have, I always end up using this amp here. It's it's a tube amp from the 90s made by Crate, modeled after kind of a Marshall-y sound. And it's very beautiful. Got so many different tones. Takes pedals well, the clean is nice. It's got 3 10-inch speakers, which is kind of random, but man, they really hit it on that amp. Believe it or not, this has the original Groove Tube speakers in it. And I mean, Groove Tube tubes in there. And I'm afraid to change them because it just sounds so magical. This is an old JCM 800. These are very similar. They're both combo amps. This one has two vintage 30s made in England. And I'm going to do a shootout on these two amps to see the similarities and the magic of these amps. Out here in the hallway I just have some, this is a very nice, it's the ultimate mic stand I use for vocals. You can kind of just get the stand out of the way for the singer, and I also use that for drums for just capturing good room tones. And that's a Mojave microphone, which is a very high-end microphone. That's my bread and butter for recording vocals and drums and guitar and bass and whatever. It just takes everything well. I like to use my effects up instead of on the floor because I'm more of a recording studio. I use them on a stand usually so that you could dial in and get different sounds. I got these nice distortion pedal by John Fisher. He's also got compressors, which I really like his compressor. It's very low coloring and it's just more like a clean boost, but it also compresses real beautiful. This is an original Maxim overdrive, super sounding like a tube screamer type. Anyways, got quite a few pedals I'm used from time to time. A couple different stands here. This is just like, kind of like my storage out here in the hallway. And I do have quite a bit of, this is my computer setup for running got my JBL monitors, and I got my computer for recording. This is the piano synth section. I have a Roland JV 1080, which is quite nice for that real analog-y sound. It's from the early 90s. Very fun, lots of different voicings in there, and it's real analog. It records in analog. I run it through this preamp, give it a little more tube saturation. Down here, all my preamps. I've got my run through Mark of the Unicorn. This is basically, you can pop. This is a patch bay where you can use any preamp for recording guitars or whatever vocals at just cabling, so you don't have to dig in the back. Here's my other 610. I got a Portico by Neve. This is an API, this one right here. Very good sounding transformer based preamp. And this is a pretty good, it's a Presonus. It's one of their more high end. It comes with compressors on each of the channels. It's got 8 channels. I use this for my toms. Comes out quite well. And again, this is that LA2, which I use for either acoustic guitars, very nice, a compressor and a preamp, or recording bass. I got lots of pedals down there. I got storage up here, a couple different drum heads, microphones. Here we got more storage, microphones, spare tubes, tools, foot pedals, more microphones, and over here I got a little piano section. This here is, I use it a lot for a metronome, sometimes just to figure out the tempo. And just metronome. It sometimes comes in very handy. Also, just finding different beats for writing songs. It's got a lot of different beats, and I don't know, it just comes in handy. I find myself going to this thing quite often. I've never really used the piano. I just kind of use it for songwriting with using the beats or the metronome or finding tempo, whatever. Comes in handy. This is a very beautiful sounding Kawai concert series weighted keys piano. Super realistic sounding, records really well, and gives you lots of really natural sustain. That's my go-to for piano. So there you go. This is the studio in a quick view. I want to sample some of these amps for you all and give you a sample of some of the guitar tones I can come up with. And we'll see you in the next video.